Hey, what's up guys, it's BenBonk, and if you're seeing this, it means that Slimekeep is out right now. That's right, after 5 whole years of development, my indie roguelike game is finally released, which feels crazy to say. So in this video, I wanted to take a step back and recap just how I got here and showcase the ups and downs of being a solo indie game dev. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, let's set the stage. The year is 2020 and I am a freshman in high school. I'd always been interested in game development and had completed a few side projects up to this point, but nothing too big. I'd also always wanted to compete in a game jam, but never really found the time. That is, until my school abruptly closed for the end of the year in March due to the pandemic, leaving me with time to compete in my first 72-hour game jam, which I actually ended up winning. This was a crazy feeling, so a few days later, I gave game jams another shot, which ended up being the 46th Ludum Dare game jam. I spent the next few days making what is now known as Slimekeep Jam version. The game was just a simple high score based game where the player would run around a room and shoot enemies. The twist being that these enemies would grow and grant the player more points at later stages. So the player would have to choose if they want to let slimes grow for more points but adding more risk, or if they just want to instantly kill slimes. And to be honest, the execution on this concept was a bit questionable and flawed, but I was still happy with the game nonetheless. It got decent reviews and lots of critical feedback. I then created and released a devlog about how I made this game, and to my surprise, it somehow blew up. At least according to my standards, as it gained almost 3,000 views in the first week, eventually reaching 40,000 views just a few months later. And this was a ton for me at the time, as I only had around 200 subscribers. So with all the feedback from the game and the video blowing up, I decided to make a follow-up devlog just a few days later where I stated how I was planning to expand the game into a full release. Although I honestly had no clue what I was doing most of the time for the first few weeks of development, and got so caught up in polishing the jam version that I didn't really have a clear vision for what I even wanted to make long term. But eventually, after a few weeks of randomly polishing things here and there, I decided I wanted to turn Slimekeep into a roguelike. Why, you ask? Well, it's solely because of these 4 early members of my Discord server who recommended that I turn the game into a roguelike. It's not that roguelikes were my favorite genre, and I don't even think I'd played a real roguelike in my life at this point, but from now on, I was making a roguelike. And yeah, I know Slimekeep sounds like a recipe for disaster at this point, but here we are today. The first year of Slimekeep's development went by pretty fast. During this time, I mostly focused on fleshing out the core mechanics for the game, although I still didn't even know what the game was really going to be besides a roguelike. But don't worry, that totally won't come back to bite me later. I created the weapon system for the game and a few new weapons so the player had more options than just their standard pistol. I then moved on to the actual slime logic. Instead of slimes just awkwardly moving around, I made them jump and upgrade into a more difficult form after a few jumps. Then I made it so the more upgraded or more difficult slimes drop more slime ball currency, a core mechanic that I tried to achieve in the game jam but never really executed too well. These slime balls could then be spent in shops that I created which would either sell weapons or upgrades to help the player on their slime slaying journey. Now this is cool and all, but around this time there was still only one basic slime in the game, so we needed more. I created a few new ones such as the bomb slime and assassin slime that are still in the game to this day. Another critical addition I made was the slime pet. This companion would follow the player around and help them in combat by attacking enemy slimes. Then we needed a way to upgrade the slime pet, and my idea was to do this through a capture gun, where instead of killing slimes, the player has the choice to capture them to gain special currency, which can only be used to upgrade the slime pet. And I should mention that I don't even fully know the reason for adding these 2 core mechanics into the game. I didn't really prototype them or test them to see if they were actually fun. I think I just wanted to make the game unique, which kind of forced myself into a corner from the start. So yeah, don't do this, as you'll see it really did not help with development down the line. And at this point, notice how it's been pretty much 4 months now, and I still don't even know what I'm really doing. I know I'm making a roguelike, but I haven't even started working on any of the roguelike or game loop elements. This is something that I really regret. I basically spent the first 4 months of development just polishing things, working on enemies, weapons, and systems without even knowing how the game was going to work and what I wanted to do with Slimekeep. So realizing this, I got straight into creating the procedural generation for the game. I went with this pre-made asset to handle a lot of the complex logic under the hood, which made my life so much simpler. So now, the game had these procedurally generated rooms that I could customize myself. Then from this point on, I started focusing on how I wanted the game loop to work. I settled on the game using a day system where the player could progress to a new day or level, which brings harder enemies and more slime balls. The catch is, the player can fight the Slime King or final boss that I plan to add to the game at any time. so just whenever they are ready, which I thought would be a bit unique. Then for the next few months or so, I worked on this game loop, making it so the player can sleep to progress through harder days/levels, and added in a few essential things such as a minimap, a pause menu, and a fog of war effect. Then to wrap up the year, I created Slimekeep's first boss, which was the mech boss, as well as a bunch of new enemies. I'd sum up year 2 of development as the content year, where I spent a lot of my time just creating, well, new content for the game. I made a bunch of upgrades for the player, many of which are still in the game to this day. This year, I also created a few of the bosses in the game. We had the DJ boss, which is my personal favorite, who synchronizes his attacks to his boss theme, as well as the Slime King, or final boss in the game. Notably, all these boss fights are totally optional besides the Slime King, who you'll have to fight eventually, but this way the player only has to fight bosses if they want, and risk their life for powerful rewards if they want. In year 2, I also worked quite heavily on the capturing and pet mechanics. I improved the capturing logic so slimes weren't so easy to capture and actually panicked a bit, kind of like Luigi's Mansion. I also made it so slimes that you capture can now be put into this slime pen and be used to upgrade your pet with actually impactful upgrades. See, previously once capturing a slime, it would just go to an invisible level system for the pet, where once you capture enough slimes, the pet will get increased speed, attack damage, etc. But now the pet could actually have a missile launcher, and other cool stuff, which was pretty sick. Then towards the tail end of the year, I worked on the Slime King's lair area, and made it so the player can now actually take a boat to fight this king. I also started finally working on designing a bunch of new room layouts for the game, and began to just focus a bit more on the game loop and combat. Then to finally wrap up year 2, I got a bunch of help from you guys with enemies in the game. I ended up adding a bunch more enemies, which was very much needed, and that was pretty much it for year 2. At the start of year 3, I felt like things were going pretty well. The game loop was really starting to come together, and we had a decent amount of content. I genuinely thought I could release the game by the end of this year, which, yeah, as you can see, did not happen. But regardless, I really took this year to hone in on wrapping up the game loop and actually polishing everything up. For example, I got around to creating systems that I knew the game needed at some point or another, like a versatile settings menu, a save and load system, a tutorial, and finish up the game's ending. I also improved many of the existing systems, like the capturing system and pet attacking system, which were a massive pain to get right, because, well, I kinda created them on a whim and ignored them for so long. Oh well. On the content side of things, I added in a bunch more as usual. We had a bunch of new enemies, new room layouts, and even new bosses in the form of this chopper boss who attacks from the sky, and the samurai boss who swings his massive katana. Let's also not forget about weapons, because I created over 20 new ones to make combat feel more varied. I also realized that the game looked, well, kind of bad. Like, seriously, it was so empty and plain that watching these devlogs back now really makes me appreciate everything I've added since. So to help fix this, I added in some grass to the ground and breakable decorations that the player can shoot at. I also created a corruption effect to make the game appear more corrupted over time, as at the end of the day, you are trying to stop the Slime King's corruption before it's too late. This year, I also found 3 awesome composers named Lydiac, Splash, and Green Explosion to make the soundtrack for the game, who honestly nailed it, so in my unbiased opinion, you should totally play the game for the soundtrack alone. Moving on, I wrapped up the start screen for the game and added Steam achievements to help with replayability. Then for the final few things I added, I created unlockable skins to make things a bit more exciting, as well as a bunch of new rooms that would have a chance to spawn, such as this casino, or these minigame rooms, to give the player a bit of a break from normal combat. And that was pretty much year 3. Overall, a super solid year in which I created a ton of great new content and wrapped up much of the game loop. But things are about to take a turn for the worse. The best way I can refer to year 4 of Slimekeep's development has to be the Dark Ages. After coming off such a high from the end of year 3 with so much new content and a mostly finalized game loop, it didn't feel like there was much left to do, right? Well, wrong. Around this time I started playtesting the game with a small group, and the feedback and bug reports came pouring in. While I still did make substantial progress on the game this year, so much of my time was spent tweaking and fixing pre-existing systems rather than actually creating new ones. This was likely because I rushed into these systems early on, like I mentioned, and was kind of paying the price now. I also amassed a ton of technical debt over the years due to really poor code and game architecture, which did not help. This year we had the infamous How a Checkbox Almost Ruined My Game devlog, where I explained how I didn't use version control or Git for my game up to this point, and yeah, I don't know how I got away with that one for so long. Anyways, this year I did end up polishing the game a bunch more. I improved the room decorations to make them feel more alive, made it so the wall tiles in the game become more corrupted as time progresses, and just did a ton of small stuff that contributed to the overall game juice and game feel. But on the content side of things, I did end up adding a new shopkeeper, a bunch of new weapons, a bunch of new upgrades, and even some new lore rooms where the player can discover the lore behind Slimetopia and the Slime King. Even though I call this year the Dark Ages, it wasn't a failure by any means. I made a lot of very important changes that were very necessary to what the game is today. However, it just felt like I was in a bit of a limbo. So much of my time was spent bug fixing and implementing playtester feedback that I just wondered if it would ever end. But some of this feedback wasn't just for small things. I made some pretty big reworks this year. For example, for the millionth time, I massively improved the Slime Pets upgrades so they were more impactful, and also changed around much of the fundamental game design issues in the game. Instead of letting the player fight the Slime King or final boss in the game whenever they wanted, by just walking to the right of their house and finding a guaranteed spawning boat room, they now had to search for a boat room which would randomly generate throughout the level and require a more adventurous playstyle. I also tweaked the slime health system depending on their stage to be more fair, and improved the slime ball drop system to further emphasize the risk-reward behavior that I was aiming for since the beginning. But with that said, that was pretty much year 4. Alright, by this point, I'm not gonna lie, I'm starting to get quite tired of working on the game, but I just have to keep chugging along. I ended up working on replayability by adding a challenge mode as well as an endless minigame mode to keep the player entertained after beating the game for the first time. I also gave every slime in the game a white outline, which I'm really not sure why I didn't do this earlier, as it helped them stand out so much more. But still by this point, I'm mostly just fixing bugs and implementing playtesters' feedback. In this devlog called How Not to Finish an Indie Game, I realized that the game just has a ton of technical debt, which is really slowing down development, but I just have to get through it. For the next few months, I just focus on more polish and feedback as usual, but I also end up making some pretty huge changes. For example, making it so the Slime Pets upgrade tree is randomized every run with new, powerful upgrades, and added visual variation in the form of these tile set overrides. I also notably created the system where the player can drop weapons to their pet to use in combat, which really feels like I should have considered this earlier, as it's kind of a main mechanic now, but oh well. And shortly after doing this, I'm slowly starting to realize that we're reaching the finish line. The bug reports from my playtesters are starting to slow down, and feedback is becoming much more positive overall. I then just spend the next few months doing everything I can to test the game, polish it up, and make sure it's 100% ready for release, which was kind of a crazy feeling because it felt like one day I just woke up and realized that the game was kind of done. And while I'm sure I probably skipped over some pretty big stuff, that's where we are today. Finally, after 5 whole years, the game is out. Now, I'd just like to take a bit of time to reflect on what I learned from this whole process, as keep in mind, this game started out as a small game jam game, and I genuinely did not expect to be working on the game for so long, so I'm really proud of myself for sticking with it. First up, I actually learned how to code, kind of. I'm not even joking when I say this, but when I started development on Slimekeep, I had genuinely no clue what I was doing. I didn't know what a C# class really was, I didn't know that functions could have return types, and I sure as heck didn't know how to write clean, reusable code. And looking back, I really was not ready to create a game on this scale, and Slimekeep's current codebase is a complete mess, but I've learned a ton through the process and what not to do. So if I ever do start another big project in the future, I think I'll really make sure to do things right from the get-go, learning from my mistakes in this process. Another thing I think I've learned a ton about is something that I was not really expecting, which is project management skills and the software development lifecycle. Working on a small game is one thing, but when you work on a commercial project, you really have to spend a lot of time on non-development stuff like managing the community, managing playtesters, implementing feedback, and so on. Even if the code I wrote for the game isn't the cleanest, I feel like I just got a super good insight into what it's actually like to develop and manage long-term software, which I'm really grateful for. And finally, I think I also just learned a bunch of small stuff that is super valuable. Like how to use influencer marketing and cold emailing for promotion, how to create better pixel art, and how I believe I am a very passionate and hardworking person who has it in me to stick with a project for 5 whole years. Even if the game doesn't sell as well as I hope, I think I just have to acknowledge this whole project as a massive learning experience and be grateful for the opportunity. So now you may be wondering, what's next for me, Slimekeep, and this channel? Well, to be honest, I don't fully know. Working on Slimekeep has literally consumed my life for the past 5 years, so I genuinely don't know what it'll feel like to not have something to constantly work on. If I had to guess, I'm sure I'll still continue to work on Slimekeep for at least a bit after launch, as undoubtedly there will be some bugs, and maybe I'll even do some content updates depending on how well the game does. As for this channel, the same goes. I'll probably make a few devlogs recapping how the game did, and showcase the post-launch game dev experience. But after that, who knows? I definitely don't plan on abandoning this channel, and maybe I'll just make some more Game Jam devlogs, challenge devlogs, or even start a new project. We'll just have to let time tell. Then on the me side of things, I definitely need a break. Don't get me wrong, I'll make sure to update the game post-launch, but after that period passes, I think I'll just take a few weeks off, because I really have not taken an extended break from this channel or game dev in the past 5 years, and I think I owe it to myself. I do love game dev, but I also really want to explore more of what the tech world has to offer and try out some different computer science mediums like web development, robotics, and so on. So maybe we'll see how that goes, but don't worry, game dev will always have a special place in my heart, and I don't plan on completely abandoning it anytime soon. I guess this is the part where I say thank you to everyone who has supported me on this journey. Firstly, I'd like to thank you guys. This project wouldn't even come to life if it wasn't for my first Slimekeep Devlog blowing up and everyone showing so much love towards the project. I also want to thank you for all the feedback and positive comments I've received over the years. I generally tried my best to take all feedback to heart and turn the game into the best version it could be, and I couldn't have done it without you guys. Next, I'd like to thank the contributors to my game and my Discord community. I received so much art help from some super generous people who I can't thank enough. I'd also like to thank the composers, Splash, Lydiac, and Green Explosion for nailing the soundtrack. Then, I'd like to thank the playtesters in the game who donated so much of their time over the years to help me make Slimekeep the best it can be. Notably, a huge thanks to Jester, Equipped Hats, The Mists, Splash, and so many others for help with some of the fundamental game design decisions in Slimekeep that I don't think I could have made myself without your input. Finally, thank you to the YouTube sponsors who have helped fund the game's development, and thank you to everyone in my life who's personally supported me and kept me motivated for the craziest 5 years of my life. So with that said, that's Slimekeep for you. What a journey it has been. If you'd like to pick up the game, please do consider supporting me by clicking the link in the description to purchase it on Steam. It's normally $14.99, but has a 20% launch discount right now if you're watching this video within the first week of release, making the game only $11.99. And I probably won't make the game go on sale again anytime soon, so now's your chance if you liked what you saw or just want to support me. Anyways, that's all I have for these Slimekeep devlogs. Thank you so much as always for watching, and hopefully you guys can enjoy your time with the game now that it's out. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.